annual Keweenaw Native Plant Symposium that we have put on, and we're thrilled this year at our lineup. It just seems like, how can we get more interesting people? And we just keep getting more interesting people. So it's going to be great. This is the first of a 3-part series. So as on the screen there, you can see our next one is on Thursday from now, April 22nd. And we're going to have the person, Bill Sanders, who's a landscape architect and responsible for helping the Marquette Co-op put in a stormwater management system and water related plants to that. So that'll be pretty cool. And then Tara Ball, who's an assistant professor at Michigan Tech, she's going to teach us about the insects that you will draw into your garden if you plant natives. And that's pretty exciting to kind of get an idea and learn who you're going to be drawing in and a little bit about their ecology. And then the Thursday after that, April 29th, Brian Black, who's faculty down at Bay College in Escanaba, is going to talk about sustainable gardening. And then there's also Nancy Lawson, who's the author of The Humane Gardener. There's a book club that our local chapter of Wild Ones is going to host, and Marsha will put that into the chat. And so you can join that, and you can join that chat whether you've read the book or not, but it is a good book and we encourage you to check it out. And then she will actually be talking about how can we garden for wildlife. A lot of, when you walk into a gardening store, a lot of it is not very wildlife friendly, you know, that you walk past the seeds and then there's all the pesticide stuff. And so she's going to talk about how we can garden in a way that won't hurt all this habitat that we want to invite into our yards. And then tonight, we're getting started off with a primer on native plant gardening with Maria Janeliak, who is, she's a member of the Keweenaw Land Trust Board, and she's also a member of the Master Gardener Program. So this is actually her project that she has done for her volunteer hours and her community service. And then the other groups that are sponsoring this on the bottom there, in addition to the Keweenaw Land Trust, we have a local chapter of Wild Ones now. And we have Master Gardeners who are a part of that program of MSU Extension. And then we also have the Keweenaw Garden Club. And they don't have a logo down there. Maybe we need to work on that, but they do have a website. So you can Google Keweenaw Garden Club if you're interested in joining. We have a great lineup of speakers locally for all kinds of topics. And I think you can put your questions in the chat as we go along. And if we can't answer them as Maria's going along here, we'll answer them at the end and hopefully have some time for a great discussion. Maria?
Yeah, hi everyone, good evening. It's really great to see all of you. All right, so what I have been asked to do is give a little bit of a starter presentation on getting started with native plant gardening in terms of what does that mean and how, if you're new to this, you know, what do you need to know? And so we will see if I'm able to answer at least some of your questions for how to begin gardening with native plants. And I really do encourage you to ask lots of questions. This presentation is only going to be about a half an hour or so. And then we have lots of other folks, you know, between Jill Fisher and Marcia Goodrich and Jeannie DeClerc and others who are, you know, also participating in this, that have a ton of knowledge. And so I really do encourage you to ask questions because we'll be able to, you know, have folks answer them along the way. I get to give the beginning gardener presentation because I'm not advanced. I'm perpetually starting out and trying to kind of figure things out. And so this is what I'll be talking about today. This is part of this is coming out of some work that I did with the Master Gardener Volunteer Program, where I put together a booklet that has information on gardening with native plants and is meant to be a little bit of a starter guide. And so I'll be hitting a few of the high points from that today. And so really getting a sense, you know, just to start out and kind of talking about what is you know, a native plant, what are native plant communities, and then how do you start to integrate them into your gardening practice or what you do. And so just to get us started in terms of terminology, when we talk about native plants and animals, really what we're talking about is plants that have been present in a particular place long enough that they've adapted to the physical environment and they developed complex relationships with other organisms in an ecological community. And so we're really talking about the plants that are indigenous to a particular place that have really, again, grown, evolved, adapted into that. And so, what plants have been on our landscape for in this particular area in the Keweenaw or wherever you might be for the last, hundreds, thousands of years that have really adapted and grown into place. So I will be talking a little bit, and I think a really good place for inspiration as you look around your yard and your local landscape is to be thinking about the native plant communities that we have in the Keweenaw and in the Upper Peninsula. And these are different mixtures, different assemblages of plant species that have grown in relationship to each other for a long time, and they are adapted to the soils, they're adapted to the climate, and so they can be a really wonderful starting point for thinking about, what would work in a garden in your particular, home or wherever you're working with, whatever area you're working in. And I also think because, we really are talking about plants that are indigenous to a particular place that, it's also important to think about that, the indigenous peoples who have also lived in these landscapes for a long time. We here in the Keweenaw and nearby are on the, current and ancestral homelands of the Ojibwa, the Anishinaabe people. And so using native plant communities can be a really great way to learn about those people, learn about their relationship to the land, and also respect those connections as well. Because, if you're coming here from maybe European ancestry or someplace different, we've kind of brought our local plants with us. Our European plants or plants from other landscapes as part of colonialization. And so thinking about these native plant communities can be a really excellent way to connect to the people in the place that we live in a much deeper way. And so when we think about native plants, one thing is to just clarify too in terms of terminology is that native can mean different things depending on where you are. And so it's really important that when you talk about native plants, you just really communicate where they're native to. So one differentiation I'll be talking about, I think is useful, is plants that are locally native. And so these are plants that would actually have been have been in the Keweenaw Peninsula, say, for centuries and thousands of years. And so Joe Pye weed is a really great example. It's something we see in the ditches, we see in stream banks. It's really beautiful. And so thinking about, these plants that are really, again, part of this particular landscape. Another thing is that when we talk about native plant gardening, a lot of times, especially in the Keweenaw where we don't have as many native plants, there are a lot of plants that are, farther present in landscapes farther south. A lot of times we're talking about plants that would be regionally native. So this might be something that's present in southern Wisconsin, southern Michigan. It's not necessarily a plant that we would have evolved or been indigenous to the Keweenaw Peninsula, but it's still adapted to a Midwest climate. It has, relatives, same species of the same genus in this landscape. And so these species can be really important to diversifying our locally native flora, bringing in additional species and also thinking about how to adapt to climate change as well. So just to think about that, because I think sometimes, a lot of times when we talk about native species, we really are talking about species that are maybe native to other parts of the Midwest. And that's not a bad thing at all, but I think it can be really helpful for thinking, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, in terms of your plant selection. So again, native plants are just a really great way to get to know your local landscape. Another idea is that if you really want to dive into this, I should have said my background is in ecology and forestry, so that's really going to come through. But another way that you can think about this is ecoregions. And so ecoregions are places that have similar soils and climate and plant communities. These are two different versions of ecoregions that have been developed through the Environmental Protection Agency. One's kind of a bigger bucket, the other one's a little more specific. But when you look at these maps, you can really see, there's a line, it's called a tension line between kind of northern Wisconsin and central Wisconsin. And we know that when you drive south, what that line looks like or feels like, because all of a sudden you go from the Northwoods into the plains. And so these can be ways of thinking about, if I'm going to look for different plant species, do I get them from maybe my ecoregion? I will post some links into the chat afterwards as well. Oh, Danielle's on it. Yes. All right. So why native plant gardening? I think folks are interested in it, but I thought one thing that was really great that I've uncovered recently is that there is a growing interest in native plant gardening. And one reason is this idea that, right now we have lawn that covers 40 million acres of land in the US. This is some of the work that Doug Tallamy has done, for those of you who are major fans of his. So 40 million acres, I had to convert that. I got out my favorite calculator, and that's 2.5 upper peninsulas that are covered in lawn that people go out and mow and tend, and if they like having really nice grass, put chemicals on and fertilizers. And so that's a lot of area of lawn in the US. And so there's been this interest in this idea of a homegrown national park. And so I think this is a really cool movement. It might be something you're interested in. You can join online. There's actually at least 2 people in the Keweenaw who have their dots on the map. So good job. I haven't got mine up there, but it's really cool to see us representing. And the idea here is that, a lot of this lawn doesn't have a lot of benefit. It's sort of nice to look at. Maybe it's definitely something that we've kind of grown accustomed to. But if we could convert half of the lawn into natural habitats, then we can collectively create the equivalent of what he says is 10 Yellowstone national parks. And so we could have this homegrown national park in our backyards and get all the benefits of seeing nearby nature and wildlife. And so 10 Yellowstones, fun fact, is 150 Isle Royals. So it's a lot of area that we could cover in natural habitats and still really get nice benefits around our homes for that. So in terms of getting started in your gardens, couple steps, really simple, but the first one I think is to just decide what benefits you want. Because we're putting the work into native plants gardening or any kind of gardening, we want to make sure that it's going to be worth the time that we put into it. And so it could be for, you could be gardening for, beauty and really just looking for ways to add aesthetics to your house or yard. You could be thinking about pollinators or monarchs, creating habitat for different species. You could be thinking about stormwater management and how to make sure that your whole yard doesn't get flooded or wash away whenever there's a heavy rain event or something like that. And so there's a lot of different reasons. And of course, you can mix and match them all that you want. And so I think just first getting really clear on what the primary things are that you want to get out of your garden is always an important place to start. This is one of the native plant. This is a prairie garden that I have at my house in Tapiola. It's about 12 years old. And when I started this one, it's not the most beautiful, but the reason I started it was because it's to hide the fact that there is a giant mound septic tank that juts into my yard right outside my kitchen window. And so it was literally just put anything in front of it so that I don't know that there is a giant mound in front of my kitchen window. So I have something to look at every evening, and it probably needs help from a lot of gardeners' standards, but at least it beats looking at a septic system, although you can kind of see a little bit of it peeking out. So yeah, just really thinking about that. And so I went through and I thought, well, the first thing I want to do is make sure naturalize, kind of have this natural landscape, hide the fact that there's a mound there in a really awkward location, and then create habitat and then bring in some of these species that are from the central Wisconsin landscape where I grew up as well. So yeah, first get clear on that. Second is to assess your site. And so if you are a gardener at all, it's going to be very similar, same steps you do for any other type of garden. If anything, I think native plant gardening makes it a little bit easier because the species tend to be more tolerant to a variety of conditions, and also because they, we're trying to match them so close to like kind of where they should be or kind of where they fit best, that this site piece can be a little bit easier. So of course, thinking about how much sun do you get? Is it full sun, partial sun, shade, is really, kind of a first step to thinking about that. Thinking about the slope, how much slope do you have? Aspect is, is it north facing or south facing? So, we get this, especially for those of you who are in Houghton Hancock, are you on the sunny side or the shady side of the portage? Kind of which way is your house tilted? And orientation to the light is going to influence which plants are going to do better. And thinking about that, of course, through the season, since it changes so much with the height of the sun. Definitely thinking about weather. How is your site exposed to different weather pieces? And so, when it rains, are you going to be, if you have a steep slope, are you subject to erosion or water flowing over across your land? Are you in a spot where water tends to puddle at the bottom of the slope? Are you exposed to wind, high winds, wind tunnel, microclimate sorts of things? Again, very similar to the sorts of things we think about when we think about any other garden location. And then your soil, of course, is a huge one. And being the extension master gardener that I am, I have to say you always should test your soil. The fortunate thing is again, I think native plants tend to be a lot more forgiving. You typically don't need to amend your soil because they're used to tolerating more nutrient poor, less just like the less posh conditions, like cushy conditions that we get in terms of garden soils, and so they can tolerate it a bit. I think really thinking about the texture of your soil in terms of, is it sandy and does it dry out easily, like sandy, rocky and easily drying out, versus maybe clayey and prone to capturing water. And a lot of, I'll talk about some of the nurseries will really help guide you based on your soil. So I think that's a fundamental piece, is just kind of knowing how quickly does your soil dry out will help you find the plants that are going to match those conditions really well. And then just thinking about other parts about how, different influences on your garden. So do you have a water source available or not? The nice thing is, again, with native plant gardens, a lot of times once you get them established, you don't necessarily need to tend them at the same level. And so you need that early establishment water source to make sure that plants don't dry out. Thinking about where your high traffic areas are, existing trees, shrubs, other plants, even do you have weedy, aggressive plants that you're going to have to make sure that you really get rid of before getting a new garden started? Is there building? Always looking for overhead lines or utility lines in the soils, especially when you're digging for putting in bigger plants. For us in the Keweenaw, snow management, and so really thinking about where do you pile snow? A lot of times, it's not a problem. You just might want to think about things that are going to be more herbaceous and die down to the soil ground, rather than something that's woody and going to be prone to collecting ice or snow and being damaged. And then thinking again about salt or other contaminants you might be getting from road soil, roadways and things like that. So just need to make sure you account for all these things. A lot of times you're going to be able to find a plant that's going to be able to persist in most conditions, but being able to kind of think about how how difficult the growing conditions are in a particular site will help you, pick something that's going to be able to tolerate those conditions. Then it comes down to selecting plants. And so really here what we're looking for is this overlapping kind of circle diagram of really, those things that you wanted from your garden, the, site conditions that you have, and then kind of what a plant needs or wants, and you're kind of trying to look at that, combination of things. So you have a plant that's going to be happy, in the site it's in, and then it's going to give you that benefit that you're looking for. And so you don't need to only have a native plant garden. I think sometimes people think you only need to do that, but really you can put native plants into a vegetable garden or a flower garden that's already existing. It doesn't matter. You can mix and match them if you want to. I think the idea is really we want to be bringing native plants into landscapes, and we don't need to be overly specific about it. The more native plants, the better, and you can do that either by incorporating native plants into, a garden from plants from all sorts of different places, or, creating a dedicated native plant garden. So I think more about how can we kind of promote native plant species, the locally native ones and the regionally native ones, and then how do we kind of demote, especially, the ones that especially are invasive or problematic and can cause trouble. So just to give you a sense of what this looks like. A couple examples. So the one that we use for our posters, and probably my favorite flower is wild bergamot, or bee balm or monarda. And so it's got this amazing smell. It's what they make Earl Grey tea out of, and so it's similar. And so it has that smell to it. It's really beautiful and has amazing flowers that feed hummingbirds. Those are shaped specifically for hummingbirds, and so it's just a really fantastic plant. It's native particularly in open and dry, open meadows, kind of drier, hotter sites that we have. I have seen it growing, in central Houghton County. So really good one, and it grows really well in the garden. And there are also some really regionally native or other genera of monarda, other species of the monarda genus, I should say, that are beautiful scarlet, bright colors as well. So really great example of one. Regionally native and adapted. So again, these aren't species that are necessarily indigenous to the Keweenaw, but they're from the Midwest. They're used to Midwest conditions. They are work well in gardens. They have good benefits for wildlife, ecology. They don't cause trouble. And they're going to grow well in conditions like we have here. So I think a really good example is purple coneflower. This isn't a plant that has been kind of part of our local landscape. It's not indigenous to the Keweenaw, but its native range does go into southern Wisconsin, southern Michigan, and it does really well here. It likes kind of our sandy, poor soils that we have, and it's gorgeous, and it provides this really great seed source to a variety of wildlife. And so again, it's not necessarily something that has been growing here for hundreds of years, but it works really well in this landscape. There's what I would call non-native and non-invasive. So I was trying to think of an example for this. And so these would be species that, are inert. They don't cause trouble. And there's a lot of garden species that would fall into this category in terms of, hostas, being a good example, just things that tend to grow well here. They look great here. They don't cause problems by growing where you don't want them. So, it does not have the adjective aggressive associated with it. That tends to be a little bit of a key word, as if a plant is described as being aggressive, it doesn't play as well with others. And so these are plants that, they're solid garden plants. They're going to stay in the garden. That's great. You probably have a lot of these, and if you like them, keep them. Absolutely fine. And then there's these species that we would call invasive or potentially disruptive. And many of these are, generally, these are non-native species. Some native species can be a little aggressive. But the classic examples we would get here are, Yes, boo hiss. Yes. So the periwinkle, the vinca, the bishop's weed or the gout weed is like the classic example we see in so many places. You know, the reason we worry about these is because we could end up with some, you know, some of these can be really problematic in that they just take over and you can't get rid of them and they really block out the native species. You know, one that's really, I don't think we have much or a lot of in the Keweenaw, unfortunately, yet, but you know, to think about it would be something like garlic mustard can be really troublesome. And certainly we have species like Japanese knotweed and others that can be a problem. So we want to get rid of them as much as possible because of the trouble they do cause. Okay, so selecting plants, what's available? Again, I encourage people to chat in on places. Definitely be asking at local nurseries. I know that I think Dennis Greenhouse is going to be carrying more native plants. I got a beautiful bergamot from Scott Artley in Baraga, so people definitely have it, and the more we ask, the more that they'll see that there's the demand for these plants. So definitely ask at your local nurseries this spring. There are special plant sales. Wild Ones Keweenaw, Marcia Goodrich has coordinated plant sale last year that was really fantastic, and so I'll let her chat in or provide more details on if she's doing that in the future. Bay College in Escanaba has a plant sale. Typically, I think it'll be, I think the end of this month. I should have that ready, but is one that is available as well. If you have been stuck in your house for, I don't know, a year or so, and you just really need to get out for a day trip, there are some regional nurseries that you can go to. And so Hanson's Nursery in Rhinelander has had plants, has a lot of native plants. And then, yeah, Designs by Nature is a new place in Marquette, and I know that person's on, so they can talk more about that. And yes, thank you for reminding me the Conservation District tree sales are happening right now, and so that would be the other place to check, particularly if you're looking for more on the woody plants, but they definitely are carrying more and more herbaceous plants as well. So definitely check those out too. And so, and then mail or internet orders. There's then, of course, infinite places. Two places that I hear a lot from our local native plant gardeners are Prairie Nursery in central Wisconsin and Prairie Moon in Minnesota. All right. And yes, all right, Wild Ones is going to be doing it later this summer. So that's great. So it's slim. It's a little slim now. We certainly wish we had more places, but it's a good good starting list. You can get these plants. My dog is always barking. The other thing is to grow your own plants as well. And so I had to grab this photo of snow sowing by Jill Fisher. So Jill's been doing a great job of collecting seeds and starting plants on her own. And I know a lot of people were trying that this winter with the Wild Ones group. Yeah, I collected seeds. I've been doing my own rooted cuttings of shrubs. And so there's definitely a potential for you to be doing that as well. You know, always make sure that you're collecting from large healthy populations. You know, don't pick any rare or endangered species. Make sure you have permission. You know, but this is something where if you know that there's a native plant gardener and you can get them to, you know, give you some seeds or give you some plants, you know, it's a really great way to get going. All right. Then planting and maintenance, you know, planting is, you know, very similar. It's going to be the same as, you know, other gardens where you really want to think about having your soils be, you know, as weed free as possible when you're planting into them, really trying to get rid of all the grass and weeds as much as possible. Another thing with native plant gardens, I didn't have a chance to put it here, but, you know, looking into sheet mulching or lasagna gardening, if you don't have a really, you know, if you don't have an invasive plant problem and you're really thinking about maybe your grass isn't too bad, you can basically cover it in cardboard and put material on top and plant into that. So if you have some place where your current vegetation isn't too aggressive or isn't too tough, you can do that as well. But it's going to be otherwise, making sure that you have something to plant into without much competition. And then, yeah, making sure it's watered at the beginning and just taking care of your plants. The other piece is on maintenance. It's really going to depend. You're going to be doing more on weed control at the very beginning, particularly depending on your situation and how good of a job you did at the start. But, again, especially if you plant at more densities or plants fill in, you really do not have as much maintenance in native plant gardens a lot of the time, or you don't necessarily need to. If you're comfortable with that, because they're going to be adapted to the site. And so this, particular garden I showed in the earlier picture, the one on the right, I'm at the point where, and again, it's not the most beautiful thing, it's not amazing, but, in terms of weeding, I spend maybe 1 hour a year, a season, in terms of just going through and pulling the worst things. And everything else pretty much gets shaded or pushed out by the vegetation that's there. And so really that yellow compass plant on the right side is probably the most weedy thing I have. And then I have to keep it going, keep it from kind of invading or growing into the rest of my garden. Yeah, so I think you can keep it, the maintenance pretty low key. The other thing I just want to say on this is that being kind of a messy, low maintenance gardener also has benefits in terms of, there's a lot of overwintering insects and a lot of other valuable benefits to leaving your plant material out through the winter. This winter with the mild snow conditions, I had gray squirrels and all sorts, birds and things eating the seed heads on the purple coneflower almost through the entire winter. And then of course there would have been lots of insects growing in, the stems and things. And so kind of letting things be a little bit more messy can have those benefits as well. All right. So yeah, in summary, there's just a whole lot of benefits to native plant gardening. And so hopefully this has given you a few things to think about in terms of what you would maybe want to bring into your garden. And I am, going to stop there. I encourage you to put in questions through the chat. And I'll stop and see, from Jill and Marcia and Jeannie, if there were any that you wanted to highlight. Thank you all very much for coming tonight.
Yes, so we've had really good turnout from around the UP and some Wisconsin people and some downstate people. So that's nice that everyone can join us from faraway places. I think we've pretty much kind of been covering things, but somebody asked about native plants that are edible that you can include in your North American diet. And I think that there's a whole lot, especially if you get into the Native American uses of plants and you get a really good book. You should definitely get a good book, because certain things you need to process in certain ways to make them safe. But once you do that, they're very edible. Like elderberries, right, Maria? We've been growing elderberries, but when you make elderberry syrup, you do have to be careful not to crush the seeds, because there's cyanide in the seeds, but not in the berries, for example.
Yeah, and I think, there's that's a great example. Jill, I think, in terms of if you're interested in the plants, the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission has a book called, plants used by the Great Lakes Ojibwa. And there are definitely some books by like Sam Thayer on foraging, and you would be able to think about which of those species can be propagated in the garden. I think for a starting point, really great crossover is thinking, probably a good starting point is thinking about some of the fruits, because strawberries, so there are native strawberries, and then they have been cultivated over time to the commercial varieties that are available, but they're the same genus. And same thing with raspberries, and same thing with cherries, and so there are a lot of fruits that are available, both in sort of a native variety or a native species, as well as, a variety of cultivated ones. And so that might be a really great crossover to think about, as you're able to bring in these plants that are native genera, but they're in kind of this cultivated form. So I think that's a really great place to start. But I would, recommend, other people chat in terms of what species they like, because yeah, there are so many edible species. I'm looking out the window at wild leeks right now, and they could be a great garden species.
I think service berries too are one of my favorite wild edibles, and man, they're good. They make good jam. They're just you can eat them. Sometimes it's hard to get them home because you just eat them as you're picking them. Somebody asked about Jerusalem artichoke. Is it native? I thought that it was. So if anybody knows differently, you can type that into the chat. But I thought that they were native, and those were those really tall yellow ones in Maria's septic covering garden, right?
No, so those are different. So what is in my garden in this picture here is called compass plant. And it's it's something else that it must be in the sunflower. I don't even know. Is it it's not a helianthus. Anyway, someone will know. Anyway, this is a compass plant. I think it's a cousin of maybe a sunflower. I think it may be a relative, but Jerusalem artichoke is a different species. It is definitely regionally native. I don't know if it's locally native, but there are locally native sunflower species. Let's see here. Columbine is native. So, Columbine is definitely regionally native. It's locally around, but not a ton. It grows great.
Yeah, Columbine is native here, so don't be afraid to plant that one. That one's really nice because it's such a early plant and provides pollen and nectar early in the season, and hummingbirds are really hungry for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I see Steve DeLong had a comment about some non-native and ornamentals are found at historic locations and are cultural landscapes in the Keweenaw. So lilacs at Quincy Hill or Vinca Cliff Cemetery. And these are valuable and appreciated when retained, and controlled. And yeah, it's really funny. I mean, I remember that Vinca in, there's some in, not Cliffview, but I'm trying to think of the other city off the top of my head, central location that is just really really cool, and it is part of that local landscape. So yeah, I think it's like we don't want to necessarily get rid of those because of the cultural value, but we do recognize, we want to make sure that they're not further moving into our natural ecosystems. And I don't know, Jill, if you wanted to say anything about like the Pavila apples, is a really great example.
Yeah, so the Pavila Farmstead clearing, if you take the hike in there off of the number 9 road, we actually were putting non-native plants in that clearing because we were trying to put plants in there that would have been found around finished farmsteads. And some of those, yeah, they can get to be invasive, but we'll just keep an eye on those in that particular setting. And but I will not plant vinca there if I can help it, because I've ripped out so much of it. When there's a plant like that, you can watch the edges, and you can if you notice there's things in your yard, there's plenty of things in our yard that we planted that we regretted later, like lady's mantle. I love lady's mantle, but it does take off and become obnoxious. So some of these things you can control just by deadheading them and cutting their seeds off before they can spread, for example.
Yeah, what other comments do we have? I meant to put that slide back up and I goofed, so let me get there again.
Oh, Sue Trull commented that the compass plant genus, is Syphilum, native to prairies, and artichoke. Yes. Sunflower.
Yeah, thank you. I knew somebody would be able to remind me off the top of my head. I'm not so great, but of course Sue is an expert and knows these, so.
Yeah, so one thing, like our yards are oftentimes open and sunny, and so we are kind of going for a prairie-like habitat in our yards, even though we were mostly forested in the whole Upper Peninsula was really mostly forested without very many open fields or prairies. So that's why I think it's important that what Maria mentioned about knowing where your plants are native to, but not feeling like you have to maintain plants just from this region. It's getting a native plant from Wisconsin is still helping the wildlife in your yard versus getting a plant from Europe. That's really going to be much more helpful. And just knowing where your plants come from is really a really good idea, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking up there. happy to see that we're helping this native plant symposium is helping people from preventing them from having to mow their lawns. So yes, that's great feedback. Oh, there was one in here I wanted to talk about. I was also amazed looking at the chat that it took this long. So we got the question about how do you get rid of snow on the mountain or goat weed, because I knew I already knew that one was coming from someone else. So
We can
yeah.
offer a support group for you. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that one it's, and I'd be curious. I mean, Jill, I know you're dealing with this at the Mars, and other folks who are involved with this symposium have probably dealt with it as well. I think partly it's knowing how aggressive it is in your particular location. The variegated or white variety, as I understand, tends to be a little wimpier. And so, that's one that I have in my yard, and it's in a shady location, and it hasn't moved in 15 years. And I haven't really tried to get rid of it because it's just kind of a low priority location. But if I were, I could probably smother it, or just kind of take the tops off from maybe a few years, or just kind of pull the tops without kind of disrupting and fragmenting the roots. And I think if it were a minor issue, it would be that. If it is an infestation, and especially the green stuff are really really aggressive, it is like a pull, like if you do it by hand and avoid using herbicides, it is a dig and try to get every single root fragment, using a hand tools, and just trying to be as meticulous as possible, and expecting you'll have to kind of tend it a little bit.
We tried an experiment last summer at Marzen. Our AmeriCorps member, Deanna Seal, she just smothered what was there, and she smothered it with 2 layers of cardboard and chips. In our home, my husband pulled out, like with one of those 3-prong rakes, pulled out all the vinca that he could, and then we put the cardboard and the chips down. And so I'm anxious to see this summer how well Deanna's method did without trying to pull it first, because I'm guessing we're going to be fighting that more there. And I think it was worth my husband's effort to pull it out as much as he could before smothering it. But the smothering works pretty well to make it reasonable for you to keep up with it. I think you'll still have to fight it for years. It'll still poke up. It's amazing that it'll still poke up, but it makes it more of a doable task.
And Michelle points out, do not put it in your compost pile. Like, do not. Yeah. Right. So probably this would be a great one. Someone asked about solarization earlier. This would be a great one. Put it in a black trash bag, or, a clear plastic bag, and like let it get zapped, or, potentially put it in the actual garbage. But yeah, don't mix it with your compost, or it will take it over.
Yeah, so Marcia is pointing out that Wild Ones has some wonderful garden designs. So if you're wondering, like, how can I put a garden in and have it look, some people really like kind of like the prairie look, and some people want more of a design. So there's some really nice designs on the Wild Ones site. There's also Audubon, Michigan has some really nice gardening for birds designs too, and helpful pages.
Yeah, and Lori asks about vinca. I don't know about vinca in terms of pulling. I think it's going to be the same one, but she asked about torching. And I think if you want to, you should try that and report back, Lori. I would love to hear from you on that one. Certainly with other weeds it works. I don't know if it would work with vinca, but it seems like if you had enough flames, it might.
Yeah, actually, if anybody has experience with flaming of the weeds, I was wondering about getting one.
Yeah. Well, to maybe, yeah, I know a few people do it. Well, to dig out some intel on that. Well, geez, yeah, feel free, to keep having questions in terms of the chat. We can hang out for a bit longer, but, also know that people have a, it's a nice evening in terms of the sun is actually out. And so, again, if you have to go, thank you for coming. And remember that we have additional presentations. We'll take tonight's recording and we'll post it at the Keweenaw Land Trust /Symposium site. And then, we have our speakers coming up on April 22nd and on April 29th. Same registration process in terms of going to the website, clicking the registration link, and then you'll have one through Zoom for those days. So thank you. Oh, and Colleen says, get a burning permit before you torch things. So yeah, Colleen. It's great to see so many people, and yeah, thank you for coming. And yeah, chill out a little bit longer if folks have questions.
And one plug there for the Humane Gardener book. So